We continue now at the top of Daf Chesam and Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 8a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that when we talk about Yachloku specifically, the Gemara was talking about two people holding a star and we say divide it. It doesn't mean you actually physically divide it. It means you divide the value. And the Gemara said you have to say that that's the case because, for example, by Shnayim Ochaz and Betalis, when two people are holding a talis and we divide it, it can't be that we physically divide the talis. Then we would destroy the talis. So again, you see that we're dividing the value. Essentially, you sell the talis and then you divide the proceeds. But the Gemara said that's not necessarily a proof. It's possible by the case of Shnayim Ochaz and Betalis that you are physically dividing it, and Dechazi Lektanim, when you physically divide it, when you cut it in half, so it's still fit, the pieces are still fit for young children. But the Gemara continues, but what about that which Rava said, Im Hoisa Talis Muzheves Cholkin, he said that if you have a golden talis, so then you divide that. So again, the same proof, Hachanami de Palgila, you're going to say over there also that you're physically dividing it. Again, Hafsadua there, you're going to destroy the talis, you're going to cause a loss of money. And so the Gemara again answers halokasha. That also would not be a kasha. It would not be a difficulty. The chazil of nei malachim, you can split it in half, and it would be fit for the children of kings. Again, they are smaller, so you can divide that golden talis in half. But the Gemara continues, but what about that which we learned in the Mishnah? It says if you have two people that are riding on an animal, v'chulu, etc., it says again, you say yachloku in that case as well. Hachanami depalgila, there also means you're physically going to divide the animal. You're going to destroy it. It's going to be a loss of money. And the Gemara says, Bishalama tahora chazi labasra. Now I understand if it's a kosher animal, so you could physically divide it up because it's fit to eat the meat. You can divide up the meat. Ela tameh, but when it comes to a non-kosher animal, hafsadu, again, you're going to cause a loss. It cannot be that we're physically dividing it. Ela lidmeh, rather you're going to say, obviously you're dividing the value of the animal. You're not actually dividing the animal physically. Hachanami, so here also in the case we had in the previous summit, let's say by shtaros, lidmeh, we're talking about dividing it up according to its value. And Rashi says, Dechazil of Nemalachim, again, Levanim Katanim, you have small children, so you're able to divide up the golden talis physically in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rami Bar Chama says, Zos Omeres, this proves, it means to say that our Mishnah proves, Hamagbia Metzia L'Chaver, if somebody picks up a lost object for his friend, Kana Chaver, then his friend will acquire that object. That is a valid form of kinyan in that case. And Rashi explains, Zos Omeres, this proves Masnisin, meaning our Mishnah proves. To Katani, because what does it say in our Mishnah? It says, Shnayim Shegbiu Metzia. If two people pick up a lost object, Kanua v'yachloku, so they acquire it and we say we divide it. Now when the person is picking up the object, he's picking it up that he should be getting half, but also that his friend should be getting half. You see from this that and now Rashi says, now later on we're going to ask on this, because where do we see that in the Mishnah? In our case in the Mishnah, the simple understanding in all the cases of the Mishnah is each person is picking it up and saying, Kula Shali, it's entirely mine. They're not picking it up for their friend. So that's Ulakame Parach Diyuka de Rami Bar Chama Mehecha. And so the Gemara later on will ask, where's Rami Bar Chama making this inference from? Me'ezu Bava Mishnah Seinu Hulam Kain, from which part of the Mishnah is he learning that? But that again is going to be dealt with later. But the point is, Rami Bar Chama is understanding that in our Mishnah they're picking up this object, let's say the talis or whatever it is, and the person has in mind to acquire half, but he also has in mind to acquire on behalf of his friend, and that's why Rami Bar Chama is saying that you see from the Mishnah, Hamagbia Metzia L'Chaveiro is Kana Chaveiro. And the Gemara continues, because if it enters your mind that Hamagbia Metzia L'Chaveiro is lo Kana Chaveiro, you can't pick up a lost object on behalf of your friend, so then in the case of our Mishnah, Tayasa Zu, so it should be in this case similar, Kimisha Munachas Al Gabe Karka, it should be as if that side is still on the ground, meaning to say, let's say by a talis. So if two people are picking it up, if I'm picking up my half and I'm having in mind that he should acquire, but if that doesn't work, so it's still on the ground as far as he is concerned. That's what the Gemara means to say. It should be Kamisha Munachas Al Gabe Karka. It's like it's still on the ground. Vizu Kamisha Munachas Al Gabe Karka. And the other side also, it's like it's still on the ground. V'lo Yikna Lo Zeh V'lo Zeh. And then nobody should be able to acquire in that situation. If you can't pick up something for your fellow, meaning to say by a lost object, so then each side is not really doing anything. And so therefore it has to be rather is it not true that if somebody picks up a mitzia for his friend, then his friend will acquire it. And Rashi explains, again, if you're going to say Hamagbiyah Metzia L'Chaveru Lo Kana Chaveru, then nobody should acquire over here. And anybody who wants should be able to take it away from them. It should not be a good kinyan. That's what Rami Bar Chama says. Again, understanding from our Mishnah, Hamagbiyah Metzia L'Chaveru is Kana Chaveru. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, really I'll say to you, Hamagbiyah Metzia L'Chaveru Lo Kana Chaveru. If somebody picks up a Metzia for his friend does not acquire it. And so then the question is, how does it work in our Mishnah, and Rava admits fundamentally that our Mishnah is the same case essentially as what Rami Bar Chama is talking about. But here the reason why it's effective is migo de zachi l'nafshe zachi nami l'chavre. Since he's acquiring for himself, so then he could acquire on behalf of his friend. Meaning to say, again, let's say in a case where they're both picking up a talis. So even if we're saying that each person is picking up for their fellow, but they're also picking up for themselves, they want to divide it half and half. And so therefore, says Rav, it's not that Hamagbiya Metzia L'Chavero Kana Chavero, it's working with a different principle. It's working with Migo de Zachi L'Nafshe, Zachi Nami L'Chavre. And the Gemara says, Teda, you should know, Rav is proving that this is the case. She'ilu Amar L'Shlucho, because if a person would say, let's say to his shliach, to his agent, say Uganovli, go and steal something from me, V'ganav, and the shliach goes in and steals it, Potter, so the person who sent him is going to be Potter. That's the rule of Ein Shliach L'Dvar Aveira. You can't appoint an agent in order to do an Aveira on your behalf. It is actually the Aveira of the person who did the Aveira. The shliach is the one that did the Aveira. That shlichus doesn't work. However, V'shutfin Shaganvu, let's say you have two partners that steal. So only one of them is doing the physical act of stealing, but they're in partnership together. So he's picking it up for himself and for his chaver. He's picking it up for himself and for his shutav, for his partner. So then chayav, and then we say they're chayiv. Now, why do we make that distinction? Why do we say ein shliach l'dvar aveira when a person sends a shliach to steal? But if it's a case of shutfin that are stealing, so then essentially we're saying that there is a sort of agency in that case. And the reason why we make the distinction, the reason why we say chayav, and by the case of shutfin, my time, and what's the reason? La'av mishum da'amrin an migo dezachi l'nafshe zachi nam l'chavri. Isn't it because we say exactly this idea? Since he's a shutaf, he's a partner, he's stealing for himself and for his friend. So since he's zocha for himself, he's zocha also for his friend. And the Gemara says, Shema mina, indeed you do see from there that that is the case. That's what Rav is saying. You see from there that is the case, and therefore we're going to apply migo dezachi l'nafshe zachi nam l'chavri over here as well. And Rashi explains again in the situation where somebody sends something to steal something, so then Pater, Hamashaleach, Pater, Milashalem Kefil, that person who's sent to the Shliach is Pater, he doesn't have to pay Kefil. To Kaimelan, because the rule is Ein Shliach Lidvar Averi, you can't appoint a Shliach to do an Averi, Chayiv Sholchu, that the person sending the Shliach should be Chayiv, that's not true. Ela Shliach, rather it's the Shliach who's Chayiv, he's responsible for his own actions. The Divrei Harav, the Divrei Atal, the Divrei Mishomen, because if you have the words of the master, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, versus the words of the student, meaning this person was sent by a student, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he was sent by the Mishaleach, so who are you going to listen to? Of course, you have to listen to the Rav, and so therefore the Shliach is responsible for his own actions. He can't say that I was acting as an agent for the Mishaleach. V'ilu shutvin shaganvu. Now, whereas if you have a case of partners who steal, meaning v'echad hotzia merishas ba'ilem l'daito l'das chaver, one of them is physically taking it out of the rishus of the owner, and he's doing it for himself and for his friend, so then amrina b'Bava Kama d'chayav, and then we say in Bava Kama that they're actually chayiv, because again, we apply the rule of migo de zachi l'nafshe zachi nami l'chavre. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Hashta da'amri amrin on migo. Now that I have said that we say this principle of migo de zachi l'nafshe zachi nami l'chavre, so cheresh u'pikeach she'gbiu metzia. If you have a deaf mute and you have a pikeach is somebody that is able to hear, that is able to speak, and they pick up a metzia, mitoch shekana cheresh, since the cheresh is able to acquire, kana pikeach, so to the pikeach is able to acquire. And Rashi explains, Hashta da'amrid migo, meaning the zachi l'nafshi v'chulu. Now that I've said this principle of migo de zachi l'nafshi zachi nami l'chavre, cheresh u'pikeach she'gebiu metzia. Let's say together a cheresh and a pikeach, they pick up a metzia, kanua, they will acquire it. Afal pisha hagbo shel cheresh. Now, even though the lifting up of the cheresh, of the deaf mute, eino hagbo liknos elam mipnei darchei shalom, that's not really considered a hagbo. It's not really a kinyan on a doraisa level. The only reason it's a kinyan is because of darchei shalom, to keep the peace. That's a derabanan kind of kinyan. That's what the cheresh does. Kiritnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, cheresh ot v'katan yesh bohen gezel mipnei darchei shalom. When it comes to a cheresh ot v'katan, there is gezel over there only because of darchei shalom. But afilu achi, but nevertheless, amar miko de zachi l'nafshi v'chula, we apply the rule. That's what Rav is saying. We would apply the rule in the case of a cheresh pikeach of migo de zachi l'nafshe zachi nami l'chavre. And so therefore, again, we would say, since the cheresh is kona, so to the pikeach is kona. And the Gemara now analyzes this idea. Bishlama cheresh kana. Now, I understand how the cheresh could acquire based on the fact that he's picking it up and also the combination together with the pikeach to come magvale bendas, because the pikeach is picking it up also on his behalf. So the pikeach is a bendas. He can, so to speak, give it over to the cheresh. That makes sense. And Rashi explains, Bishlama cheresh kani, to kamagbala bendas. I understand how the cheresh can make a kinyan, because there's a bendas picking up the other side, l'rosha hasheni, that other side of the object, he's picking it up, l'tzorech shneim, and he's picking it up for both of them. V'rosho shel tzad cheresh l'gabe cheresh, and when it comes to the side that the cheresh is picking up, at least as far as the cheresh is concerned, miya hava hagbah, that's considered being lifted up, k'detikon leimim nei darchei shalom. As far as the cheresh is concerned, it's considered hagbah, because of darchei shalom, meaning to say, the entire object, let's say the whole talis, is being lifted up for the cheresh. That makes sense, because the part the cheresh lifts up, that works for him, that works for the cheresh, and the part that the pikeach picks up can work for the cheresh as well, because he has an even greater level of kinyan than the cheresh. Ela pikeach, but as the Gemara is about to say, but when it comes to the pikeach, b'mai kani, how does he acquire it? How does he make that acquisition? L'gabe pikeach have a rosha shigbi cheresh, because in reference to the pikeach, the side that the cheresh picks up, kimunach al gabe karka, that's still like it's still on the ground. That's nothing. It's only darchei shalom that it's considered a hagbah, but it's not considered a hagbah in reference to the pikeach. The hagbah the cheresh lo kanya ela midarchei shalom bialma, because hagbah of a cheresh it only acquires because of darchei shalom. So that's why the Gemara is going to say, I understand how the cheresh could acquire here, because there's a ben das lifting the other side, legabe the cheresh. But how is it ela pikeach? But when it comes to the pikeach, b'mai kana, how is it possible that he's able to make a kinyan? And so the Gemara says, you're right, we have to revise what Rava just said. Ela ema, rather say it as follows. Cheresh kona, the cheresh could be kona, because again he has it being lifted up from both sides. But pikeach lo kona, but for the pikeach he can't acquire, because he's lifting it up one side, but the cheresh hagbah does not work for the pikeach. But the Gemara continues, if that's the case, umay migo, so what's the migo? How are we applying migo in this situation? Meaning to say, we are now suggesting that the pikeach is picking it up on behalf of the cheresh, and that works for the cheresh can acquire. But if the pikeach is not kona himself, so he's not zochi l'navshe, so you can't say migo de zochi l'navshe, zochi nam l'chavre. So how is the pikeach able to lift it up on behalf of the cheresh? As Rashi says, umay migo ikalamei marhacha, what migo can we say over here? To come arhash dam and migo amrinan migo, because you just said now that we said the concept of migo will apply it over here, but it doesn't apply over here. And if it doesn't apply over here, v'cheresh amay koni, so why is the cheresh? Why does he acquire? Halo zachi pikeach l'navshe, the name of the zachi nam l'chavre. The pikeach is not being zocha for himself, that we should be able to say he's zocha for someone else. It's not true. He can't be zocha for the cheresh if he's not zocha for himself. V'lo hava hagbah, the pikeach hagbah, and therefore the lifting up of the pikeach is not considered a hagbah. So how exactly, even according to the revised understanding of Rava, how does that work? And so the Gemara answers to that, what we mean to say is migo de shnei charoshin bialma konu, hainami koni. What Rava means to say is, since let's say it would be two deaf mutes that would be picking up this object, that actually would be effective, because a cheresh could be kona on behalf of another cheresh. There you don't have the problem of an individual trying to be kona for somebody's only darchei shalom. They're both in the same category. Both charoshin in this case are kona because of darchei shalom. So since if two charoshin would pick it up, so that would be effective. So in this case as well, when you have a cheresh and a pikeach, even though the pikeach is not able to acquire, because as far as the pikeach is concerned, the lifting up of the cheresh is nothing, but we apply the migo, since if it would be two charoshin, it would be a good kinyan. So too over here with the cheresh and the pikeach, the cheresh is able to be kona. But the Gemara says, hi, mai, but how are you able to draw that idea out of the case of Shnei Charosh, and it doesn't really work? And the Gemara explains, even if you were to say that if somebody picks up a metzia for his friend acquires, but that's only if he's picking it up for his friend. But over here, here, he's trying to pick it up for himself. In this case, you have a cheresh and a pikeach, let's say. The pikeach is not only trying to pick it up for the cheresh, he's trying to pick it up for himself as well. So and he's not acquiring for himself. So now you think it's going to be effective that he can give it over to somebody else. It doesn't make any sense in that situation. We understand by Shnei Charoshin, let's say, that it can be effective, but if you have a cheresh and a pikeach, and the pikeach is not even able to pick it up for himself, how can he pick it up for somebody else? And Rashi explains, even if you were to say that somebody could pick up something for somebody else, but he's picking it up for himself, now you're going to say the pikeach, which is not even effective for him to pick it up for himself, he'll be able to pick it up for the cheresh. That does not make sense. And so the Gemara therefore says, rather you should revise Rava's statement as follows, mitoch shelo kona pikeach, since the pikeach is not able to be kona, lo kona cheresh, so the cheresh is also not able able to be kona. But the Gemara says, V'chitema, now if you're going to say, Ma'ishna mishnei charosh and dialma, well, what's the difference by two deaf mutes? We allow it to be a kinyan, and when you have a cheresh and pikeach, we don't allow it to be a kinyan. And to that the Gemara says, Hasam over there, Takinu lu rabbanan lo asil insuye. The rabbanan make this takana so that there should be no fights. But hacha meimar amar pikeach lo kani, ano akni. Here the cheresh will surely say to himself, if the pikeach himself cannot acquire, I should be able to acquire. There's no reason to assume that there will be a fight. And Rashi explains, they shouldn't come to have a fight with those who are taking it away from them. So there, by two charashim, we say that it is a good kinyan. But again, when it comes to a cheresh and a pikeach, the cheresh will understand that he shouldn't acquire if the pikeach is not able to acquire. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Ravacha Breder Ravadal Ravashi, Ravacha the son of Ravada said to Ravashi, Diyuke de Rami Bar Chama Mehecha. Well, where exactly in the Mishnah is Rami Bar Chama making his inference from? Again, Rami Bar Chama was assuming that in the Mishnah, the person is picking up, let's say, two people picking up a talis, each one is picking it up for himself and for his friend. Where do you see such a case in the Mishnah? Inema Meresh, if you're going to say from the very first case of the Mishnah, again, Shnayim Ochzim Batalis, the case where two people are holding a talis, so that's not what's happening there. Hasam Haikam Arkula Shaliv, Anoag Batakula, Vahayam Arkula Shaliv, Anoag Batakula. Over there, this one's saying the whole thing is mine. I picked up the whole thing. This one is saying the whole thing is mine. I picked up the whole thing. Nobody picked it up for somebody else. So rather you'll say that it's being learned from the fact that there's a line in the Mishnah which says Zeh Omer Kula Shaliv, Zeh Omer Kula Shaliv. This one says it's all mine. This one says it's all mine. It's like an extra line. Hasu Lamali. What do we need this extra line for? Elam Mishnah Yisera. So we'll learn out from the fact that there's this extra line in the Mishnah. Shmami Noha Magbia Metzia Chaver Kana Chaver. So that's what Rami Bar Chama sees. If you pick up a Metzia for his friend, then his friend acquires it. But the Gemara says it's not extra. We already said that the first part of the Mishnah is talking about a lost object, and the end of the Mishnah, the second part of the Mishnah, is talking about a situation of a purchase, where they're arguing who's the one that purchased it. And so the Gemara says, Elami Seifa, so rather what Rami Bar Chama was saying was learn it from the Seifa, meaning the next case of the Mishnah. Ze'omer Kula Shaliv, Ze'omer Chetzia Shaliv. This one says the whole thing is mine, and this one says half is mine. That's really the same case again, just different amounts. Hasu Lamali, what do we need anything further for? Elami Mishnah Yisei Rashmami Naha Magbia Metzia Chaver Kana Chaver. So from the extra line, we learn out Hamagbia Metzia Chaver Kana Chavero. But the Gemara says, and we might have Metzia, but who says this extra line is even talking about a Metzia? Dilma b'Mekach Umemkar. Maybe it's talking about Mekach Umemkar. Maybe it's talking about a purchase as well. You can't learn anything out about Metzia. And the Gemara says, now if you're going to say, well, if it's Mekach Umemkar, so what are we even saying it for? Then there's no Chiddush. It makes more sense to say Metzia, and there's some kind of Chiddush of Hamagbia Metzia L'Chaver Kana Chavero. But the Gemara says, no, it's true, we do need it. Because one might have thought, the person who's saying Chetzia Shali, so it's like he's almost returning a lost object. He's admitting that he didn't buy the whole thing, it's only half, and therefore he should be potter in such a situation. He should not need to take an oath. Kamash Malan, so that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. The Hayurume Kamarim. This person really, maybe he's acting in a crafty manner, Savar, because he thinks to himself, Yamina Kula Shali, if I say the whole thing is mine, Boinish Tabui, then I need to take a Shvua. So I'll say this way instead, the Havik Kameshav Aveda, that way it's like I'm returning a lost object, I'm admitting to half of it, Vifter, then I'll be potter, I won't have to take a Shvua. And so therefore the line would be necessary even if it was Mekach Umemkar, so we still don't have an extra line. And so the Gemara says, Elameha, rather learn it out from this case of the Mishnah, the next case, Hayushnaim Rochvan Al Gave Behema, it says two people riding on an animal. Hasu Lamali, what do we need another case for? It's exactly the same kind of case. Elami Mishnah Yasera Shmami Naha Magbia Metzia L'Chaver Kana Chaver. So you see from the extra line, the extra case, this idea of Hamagbia Metzia L'Chaver Kana Chavero. The Gemara says to that, V'dilma Hakamashlan, maybe not. Maybe that line in the Mishnah is teaching us the Rochev Nami Kani, that riding an animal is also a way to make a kinyan. You wouldn't necessarily know that Rochev is a way to make a kinyan. And so the Gemara says, Elami Seifa, rather it comes from the next line in the Mishnah, very end of the Mishnah, it says, Bizman Shein Modim, O Sheyesh Lameidim Cholkim Below Shvu. It says if they admit, or if there are witnesses, they divide without a shvua. So what's this line talking about? But what's the case? If it's talking about a sale, do we even need to say this? It's so obvious that would be the case. Rather, no, we're talking about a case of a lost object which was found. And the extra line, that's what it's teaching us. The Rava Amar Lach, and Rava will respond to you. He'll say back to Rami Bar Chama, no, that's not what it's teaching us. It is teaching us something, but it's not teaching us rather it's teaching that since he acquires for himself, he's able to acquire for his friend. And Rashi explains, Mishnah Yisera, from the extra case of the Mishnah, Amrinan da Magvia Metzia v'chulu. That's where we learn out Magvia Metzia l'chavero kana chavero. Umishum hachi Amrinan yachloku. That's why we say divide it. Amrinan shneim higbiua. We say that both of them picked it up. V'havalei kol echad Magvia Metzia lo v'lechavero v'kani. It's as if everyone is picking it up for him and his friend, and it's a good kinyan. The imishum de lo yadina now, because if you're going to say the more classic understanding, because we don't know haiminai mashakar which one is lying. V'havalei momen hamutal besafek, and it's just a situation of doubt. V'cholken b'shvuah. We divide it with a shvua, because we don't want everyone to just go around grabbing each other's talesim like we said earlier. So that could be the explanation, but that we already know from the first case of the Mishnah. That's why the extra case is teaching us this idea. And Rashi says further on, and Rava will say to you, in a normal situation, if the person picking it up wasn't thinking to acquire it himself, so he can't acquire it on behalf of his friend. Now, in terms of the other case of the Mishnah, the extra case, Ashmina, that teaches us a different chiddush. That if he's picking it up for himself and his friend, then it actually does work for his friend. That's the migo de zachin l'navshe, zachin ami l'chavre. That's the principle of migo de zachin l'navshe, zachin ami l'chavre. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. How Yushnayim Rochvin, the Mishnah said, if two people are riding on an animal, Amar Rav Yosef said, Amar Li Rav Yehuda said to me, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Beis.